everybody, and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News, your favorite podcast about fake news. I'm Beth.
And I'm Kelly.
Hey, Kelly. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Beth. How are you?
I'm good. We actually didn't get any hate mail from our last episode, so...
We didn't.
Yet.
There must be very reasonable listeners out there listening to what we're saying.
Thank you, reasonable listeners, for not hating us.
Thank you, indeed. We were really kind of worried about taking on that episode, but it's been not nearly as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I remember when Elizabeth and I recorded our very first episode, we actually ended up going back and, like, scrapping it and re-recording a whole new episode. Yeah. And part of it was just, like, figuring out, like, rhythm and, like, what to do and all those kind of things. But one of the things that we had taken out were some mentions about Andrew Wakefield and the vaccine study and all this kind of thing, because we were trying to, like, not go there at that point. And now I'm like, fuck it, we're like diving deep into that pool.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. And Beth and I did not want to do another big heavy episode this week. So no. Despite there being things in the news that we would like to tackle, we decided to go a little lighter, although I don't know how really light this was, but it was a little bit less on the stressful, controversial side, I think.
The logo's cute for the documentary. Very.
Yes, it is.
That's very light, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I had watched this documentary about maybe like a month ago, and I told Kelly about it, and it's called The Brainwashing of My Dad, and it was a really interesting documentary and also scary.
Yeah, really scary. But also, I mean,
it's
already happened. So the history that it goes into, it's kind of all already happened. It's less scary to me and more like, oh my God, of course, this is how it all fits together. It's like watching little pieces of a puzzle of what brought you to Trump's America. It's just fitting these little pieces together. And it's, sometimes it feels like, oh my God, am I living in a conspiracy theory?
Yes, you are. No. So a little background on what this documentary is about. This filmmaker noticed that her once Democratic father started listening to right-wing radio pretty much nonstop, and has started watching Fox News.
And he started listening for the same reason a lot of other people said they started listening, right?
He has a commute.
Right. He has a commute, which is why so many of us listen to podcasts like this one.
So he had a commute, and he would listen to Rush Limbaugh every day on his commute. And it started spilling over into he had to have, right-wing radio on all the time and Fox News on all the time, and became this very angry person that she had a hard time recognizing. And it just she wanted to look at what happened, why with her dad listening to these radio shows and watching Fox News, his personality had changed.
Right. And I mean, it's important to remember as well, like she did a Kickstarter to do this film.
Yeah.
And she was looking for $15,000, and she got like $46,000 within the first, I think, couple of days.
Yeah.
Because this story is so familiar. This is not a story no one else has.
Right. And a lot of people, she ended up interviewing a lot of people that had reached out to her that said, my dad too, or my mom, or my cousin, or, my brother too. And so it was really interesting to hear the stories. And I was really struck by it, the change in behavior that people noticed. Because she interviewed like her cousins, I believe, and they were talking about, their uncle, which is her dad, and saying he used to be just the kindest, nicest person. And now he's just this angry man that screams all the time.
Right. And her brother too, like his other children.
Yeah.
She interviewed.
And she said basically like, they can't talk about anything because he would get so upset.
Even his wife, he had moved out of their bedroom at night so that he could watch more of this news. And she didn't want to listen to it, so he moved into a separate bedroom. from her.
I love the wife.
Yeah, she's
I
great.
love the mom.
She's like the hero of the story. You
She
don't
is
know
totally-
it
yeah,
when you
until the
start,
end.
but she is what I mean. She's
Spoiler alert.
she's the
amazing.
Shiro of the story for sure.
Yeah, yes. So it was a very interesting look at some things, and definitely I learned a lot watching it. And there were some familiar faces in there, like David Brock, who was the founder of Media Matters. And remember, we interviewed Alex Kaplan from Media Matters not too long ago.
That was our radio episode, right?
Yeah. So we've been familiar with Media Matters. So I was kind of like, oh, look, it's David Brock with Media Matters. That's great.
Yeah.
I say let's dive in here and talk about some of this.
Do you want to start with some of the stuff that David Brock says about?
Yeah.
So David Brock is the founder of Media Matters, but he also wrote a book called The Fox Effect, which in this movie, what he's talking about is he begins by explaining that the difference between traditional journalism, which is it strives to be objective. That's always been the point of journalism. Everyone comes with their own bias, but you are supposed to be taking the pieces of different stories and making sure the truth gets out.
Wait, what?
I know. It seems crazy because the place we're talking about does the exact opposite, which is the conservative media movement. And they claim to be for balance, and balance is different than neutrality because balance says you have to present both sides equally. And if you have 99% of scientists saying climate change is real and we need to do something about it, but you have 1% that's funded by oil and gas and coal saying it's not, but you present them with equal time, as if their claims are exactly the same weight, you are doing a disservice to your listener or your watcher or whoever it is, your audience.
And I believe the infographic that they had up there, it was literally like 99,000 scientists agree that climate change is man-made and 4 don't.
Yeah.
4. 99,000 versus 4. So yeah, you're absolutely right. To give equal airtime to both sides on that is very skewed. It should literally be, here's the evidence, here's the facts that 99,000 scientists agree on. And then, just as a by the way, there's 4 scientists that disagree with them. Have a good day. You can, that's all they deserve in that situation. That's
it's not it's not even a 0.1%. I mean, you are getting into such a small number that it's automatically considered negligible, and it doesn't matter in any sort of statistical way.
And it really, it just kind of blew my mind watching that, seeing that. I mean, I knew that, I've heard that before. 99% of scientists agree climate change is caused by humans and 1% don't. But when you see that the actual numbers of the actual amount of scientists that agree that versus that it doesn't, I'm just shocked that those 4 scientists saying that was able to break through. And it's not that these
they have a lot of things behind them that are pushing that message forward. That's part of what we're talking about.
It's almost more like 4 think tanks say that, it's not. And it's because they're sending these pundits on the air to say, well, no, we have the studies to back it up.
Right.
So, yeah, there is that army behind it. It's not just those 4 scientists going, but wait, we think that, da, 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 da. And the world is like, yeah, that's just not right. That's how it happened. But it does kind of boggle your mind when you think about how they're able to push this false narrative so far that people believe it. So speaking of think tanks, I want to tell you about a very special one.
Which one do you want to talk about, Beth?
So I want to tell you about the John Birch Society. So have you ever heard of them? I mean, before the documentary?
I had. I will talk about it a little bit more in my jam of the week, but yes, I have unfortunately heard about them and their connection to the Koch brothers.
Yeah, so this was a think tank that was founded in the 1950s by Robert Welsh, who idolized the year 1900 as the most perfect time in American history. before child labor laws, before worker rights, income tax, or women voting. So,
Yeah, before divorce.
do you think they were conservative or liberal?
I mean, how much different is it for a guy in the 1950s who was born in 1900 or like 1899? I did look it up at one point. How much different do you think it is than someone who was born in the 1950s who is living now and says the 1950s were the most idyllic time?
Who says that? Is it Donald Trump?
It's Donald Trump, but it's all Republicans. It's all Republicans of that certain age because it's your child idyllic mind remembering
Right.
this perfect time because they're all just a bunch of white men who had wonderful childhoods. Most of them had amazing childhoods or they had something amazing about their childhood and you look back fondly on it. And that's what they all want to go back to, that beaver cleaver that never existed childhood.
So she talked about this think tank in the documentary, and I do remember at the end, she actually compares them to the Tea Party. It's like back then they were considered really extreme, and they were like kind of written off as cuckoos. And
by the 70s, yeah.
Now it's like the Tea Party has a lot of the same similarities, and they're totally accepted.
Yeah, they just pushed, just like the conservative Christians did in the 80s. They've just pushed since the Tea Party first came out. They've just pushed and pushed and pushed to the right.
So Fox News actually got started back in October of 1996, and there is a reason why Fox News was able to start. And Kelly, do you want to tell us about the Fairness Doctrine and what happened?
Yeah, so the Fairness Doctrine was passed in 1949, and all it did is it required broadcasters, anyone who put anything out, they had to devote some of their airtime to discussing the controversial matters of public interest. So they had to have a contrasting view, and if you did not see like your view represented, you could write to them and they would have to try to give not equal time. It didn't guarantee that, but it
Right.
guaranteed a small amount of time to the other side so that the contrasting views could be presented. When that went away, when that was rescinded, it was rescinded under Reagan, if I remember correctly, it made it so that people like Rush Limbaugh and the early days of that right wing were allowed to just run roughshod all over the public broadcast.
Okay, so the FCC eliminated the policy in 1987 and removed the rule that implemented the policy from the Federal Register in August of 2011. So yes, you're right. That was removed under Reagan.
Yeah.
So, and yes, this has been widely credited with the removal of that is what allowed for these talk radio and news organizations to pop up that didn't have to give both sides.
Right.
And so that's where you see our good friend, Rush Limbaugh.
He's no friend of mine, Beth. Dear me. I almost had a heart attack when you said that statement.
It boggles my mind that people hear him and don't just go, he's insane, and never listen to him again. But apparently people have listened to him again and again and again.
They do.
And again.
They do. I have this exact story. Do you have anyone in your life that you've lost to Rush Limbaugh?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, we've lost a friend who, he was the best man at my wedding.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was one of my husband's best friends, and he had a conservative dad, but didn't have, like, he wasn't ever conservative. He always believed in, just do right by me and I'll do right by you. Like, that was we used to call the religion, like, by his name. I don't want to out him and give his name, but we used to, like, if his name was Greg, it would be like Gregism or something like that, you know? And we used to laugh about it. And it was like, that's what I am. I'm a Gregist. because he believes that, just be cool with me and I'll be cool with you. And I was like, that's the kind of religion that everyone can get behind. Nope. He started listening to Rush Limbaugh and then voted for Trump and just doesn't see the irony at all of what he did at all. And he just wanted to basically watch the world burn because he thought everyone was corrupt.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I knew that I didn't agree with Rush Limbaugh on a lot of things. And I knew that, I cringed every time I was forced to listen to Rush Limbaugh for, amounts of time while on hold with some sort of 1-800 number or something. Jeez, yeah, where they were playing it,
Yeah.
But I had never really researched or really dug into how Rush Limbaugh came to be. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is there was this whole culture around him. They call themselves ditto heads.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either because I've only really had to be forced to listen to him very, very few times.
Yeah.
I have listened to him just for giggles, just to be like, what is the fuss about? And I don't ever like to listen to a ranting and raving old white man. That has never been my jam, ever. So it's other people's.
Well, I guess what it is his supporters, his fans, call in and they say, ditto, Rush, like saying, I agree with everything you just said.
Right. And right. So, I saw that in the movie. And then don't they do like double ditto or mega ditto or something? Oh, mega ditto. That's what it was.
Well, they call themselves ditto heads. And it was just really interesting. And to hear some of the things that he said, it really highlights how much he just makes stuff up.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not at all balanced or
oh no, and he doesn't even try to make it.
Yeah, or even based in reality.
No,
I mean, one of his big things. So he really likes to hype the overdog. So like the coal industry or big tobacco, and he'll make claims that secondhand smoke is harmless, and blaming the environmental wackos for the BP oil spill of 2010.
Yeah, for attention, to get attention to the environment. All right.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a special kind of someone, but I will tell you something that's really scary, Beth, which is that one of his biggest fans, one of his biggest ditto heads is Clarence Thomas. Do you remember Clarence Thomas?
He's Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas?
Yeah, he's one of the two current, Supreme Court justices that's accused of sex crimes.
Oh boy.
Just one of two. I mean, just one of two. Brett Kavanaugh?
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna.
It's hard putting all these politicians with their sex crimes together. It's hard to remember sometimes.
Can I make a confession here?
Yeah.
Live on the podcast right now?
Yeah.
I'm not a violent person, and I don't believe in violence, and I don't believe in ever planning any sort of violent thing. But I would really support Brett Kavanaugh being kidnapped and being forced to resign from the Supreme Court. Like, I just imagine...
like by any means necessary?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all down for a vigilante girl gang.
Yes.
I'm not going to do it. FBI, if you're listening, we're not going to do this.
But here's the thing. Like, I'm thinking of... And I can't think of, what movie I'm seeing this scene from. Oh, okay. Remember? Oh, it's that True Story. Remember the movie? It was based in Miami. It had Mark Wahlberg in it and The Rock, and it was Pain and Gain. That's what it was called.
Oh no, I don't even remember hearing about that.
Yes. So, okay. First of all, you're a murderino, so you need to watch this because this is a murder. Okay. And it's a true story. Okay.
Okay.
So, Danny Lupo was the manager of the Sun Gym in the 1990s Miami. And in order to achieve his American dream, he came up with this plan of extortion. And he recruits Paul and Adrian as accomplices. And after several failed attempts, they abduct a rich businessman, Victor Kershaw, and convince him to sign over all of his assets to them. But so that guy makes it out alive. So they start blowing through all his money. And
Is this a funny movie?
This is like based on a true story. I mean, when you're watching it, you're like, there are some funny things, but it is like a true story. It's not a comedy. They end up killing the next couple that they try to do it to.
Jesus. Okay.
And so, yeah. Anyway, you would like it. Pain and Gain. Okay, but anyway, so when I see that, like, the memes of like Brett Kavanaugh like crying the I love beer, that face where he's like crying.
I know the face.
Yeah, I keep thinking of like that kind of scene where like somebody's like forcing him to resign from the Supreme Court because he should not be a Supreme Court justice. And I know that there is like the impeachment route to go with him. So I know that there is that slim hope out there that we won't have him on the court forever.
They'd have to prove that he lied under oath. And I don't know that there's no concrete evidence.
So anyway, that was a little bit of a dark turn in our
all I was really trying to say is that so Clarence Thomas is a huge Rush Limbaugh fan.
Okay, back to that.
Yeah, he will actually tape Rush Limbaugh.
Oh God.
And listen to like he'll tape it if he has to work so that he can listen to it. But remember that Clarence Thomas has said on record that he will never listen or read mainstream news like the New York Times or Washington Post because they're just liberal-leaning news and he doesn't trust them.
Oh my God.
But he listens to Rush Limbaugh. And he's friends with him. He officiated his third wedding. He is not, like, I'm not saying he might not be still a fan. The guy's a fan for life. Okay. Right. He officiated his third wedding, and I think it was at his house.
Yeah. So Rush Limbaugh makes a lot of money.
He does.
A lot of money.
So much money. It's so gross that he makes that much money.
And part of it is that he gets sponsorship deals with right-wing think tanks like the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that seems right. So that brings us to 1996 when Fox News was launched by a little-known billionaire named Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
And led by Roger Ailes. Now, Roger Ailes was...
He was gross.
Wait,
is this a Mad Libs? Because I've got more adjectives here. He was gross. He was handsy. He looked like a white, dried up old turd. He looked like if Jabba the Hutt became a real person. He was disgusting. And all he did was try to touch and rape women. He was the worst of all humanity. But you go ahead. You go ahead and say what you were going to say, because I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, that was fine. So Roger Ailes used to work for Nixon.
Yes, he did.
And do you know what he did for President Nixon?
He made sure that Nixon knew how to be on TV.
He was a media consultant.
Yeah. He wanted to make sure after that horrible interview that they always talk about with Kennedy and Nixon, he started working for Nixon right after to make sure that he knew how to be on television and be smooth and not blink so much, not sweat so much, and use makeup. He did all of that to make sure that Nixon won.
Yes. He also wrote a memo. Do you know what memo I'm talking about?
I think I do know the memo that you're talking about. Are you talking about the memo that he wrote to Nixon about GOP TV?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they would have called it. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So paraphrasing here, he basically said, if you lie to them often enough, like if you keep repeating this lie, they're going to believe it.
Right.
Is there a better way to paraphrase what he was saying there? Did I get that right?
What I saw that he wrote was that I think I have it written down. Yes, I do.
Okay.
He wrote that today television news is watched more often than people read newspapers, than people listen to the radio, than people read or gather any form of communication. The reason? People are lazy. With television, you just sit, watch, listen. The thinking is done for you. And he wrote that in 1970s to Richard Nixon. It is in the Nixon Library.
He wrote that, but he also wrote something about, like, these people are dumb, we can lie to them, and they won't catch on.
Oh, he may have. That's not what I found. What I found is where he was just like, people are lazy. So if you tell them what to think, that's what they're going to think.
Yeah.
If you just put the information.
Are lazy. Yep. People are lazy. Tell them what to think. That's what they'll think. Done. Yeah. So that's basically what he went into with that notion to start Fox News.
Right.
And they came up with this tagline, fair and balanced, which from the beginning was a joke.
Right.
They knew on Fox that they weren't being fair and balanced. And in fact, so she interviewed a progressive person that used to be on Fox as kind of like the alternate person. Right. And he said they would come off from filming a segment and people would go, well, that was fair and balanced. And everybody would laugh because they knew that they weren't being fair and balanced at all. And he said, basically, there's no journalism done at Fox News. When the tsunami hit, they didn't have any way to cover it. They didn't have cameramen on the ground. They aren't a real news organization.
Right. It's not just that they didn't have cameramen on the ground. They weren't able to send news reporters there because they don't have those type of reporters.
Right. They
can't cover that.
Production assistants in a building.
Right. They stay in one place.
Yeah, they stay there. They don't go out. And so it's not journalism being done. They're not reporting stories that they have found out the information and, pulled it together as journalists. Right. They're basically just going on and giving their opinions.
Right. And sometimes it's not even true stories that they're saying. There's a reason that they've been called faux news for years, for decades now, because the real issue with this is that the fake stories bleed over into real media.
Yes.
Which means that confirmation bias becomes even larger when other places are saying these false stories. And the example that she gave in the movie was when right after the Charlie Hebdo murders in Paris, Fox started a story about no-go zones in the city where law enforcement and non-Muslims were just not allowed to go. And they were havens for terrorism, and they were Muslim terrorist training camps. And not only was it false, but Anderson Cooper reported on it, and he also had to come out and say that it was false. And, they do that thing where they'll cover a story for a week, and then they'll spend 2 minutes telling you that it's false.
Right.
And, that's the biggest challenge, is that if you're not watching in those 2 minutes, it's much like we talked about with the radio. If you're not listening when they say that story isn't true, because it's on 24 hours a day, you just don't know.
Yeah, it's just really, and it's not even just we made a mistake. It's pushing false narratives that then other networks like CNN or MSNBC have to then debunk, and they have to have that person on that's saying those things, and they have to debunk it and have their experts on saying, but it's still getting playtime on these other networks.
Exactly. And you can't even take just that. I mean, you can think about, she also talked about the Iraq War. I mean, Fox News was the propaganda arm of the Republican Party at that time, and basically walked us right into the Iraq War.
Right.
Because they were like, oh, we have to save our country. There's weapons of mass destruction. And they kept repeating it. And no one was telling them that it wasn't true.
And that's not the only war they've gotten us into. The other war that they have famously gotten us into is the war on Christmas.
Oh, that's
and
right.
And that is completely fabricated by Fox News. And in the documentary, he said people, 90% of people love Christmas. So we're going to take Merry Christmas, and the other networks can have the 10% of people that don't love Christmas.
Right.
So they literally found something that people love to try to create fear-mongering so that they would, watch their news. And she says in the documentary, her dad She says, I didn't know there was a war on Christmas until my dad told me,
Right.
and everywhere he went, he would insist on saying Merry Christmas. He refused to say Happy Holidays. And it didn't matter basically the time of year
Yeah,
or
right.
anything. And she said he would even go up to people in front of a Jewish synagogue and blatantly get in their face and yell, Merry Christmas!
Yeah. Yeah. It was awful.
Isn't it
I mean,
terrible?
I know the exact feeling that like what she is talking about,
Right.
because we all have that member of our family. But I mean, it must be so hard watching your dad change like that.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I do feel bad for these people who are being fed this nonsense and then have this false fear that the world is trying to take away Christmas from them, or that,
Right.
Muslims are going to invade and create Sharia law on their, in their neighborhood, because
Right.
we have enough to worry about without having to worry about crap that somebody made up for ratings.
Correct. And that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing too with Fox News. The people who watch Fox News only watch Fox News. Okay?
Right.
And people who skew liberal tend to have more than one news source. So they'll watch MSNBC and NPR and CNN. They kind of like switch back and forth. They like to get different, takes on things.
That's right.
And Fox News viewers are not like that. They only watch Fox News, and that's it.
Right. And that's Republicans. It was like people who consistently vote Republican, it was like 42% watch only Fox News, and for the same percentage of Democrats only they would watch different sources. Right. Yeah.
And one of the other things that struck me too is the fact that 97% of talk radio is conservative. Only 3% of talk radio is progressive. And when you think about all those people out there driving, now we do have podcasts now. So,
oh, thank God. Thank God for progressive podcasts. There are so many of those.
Yeah, so you can definitely get, basically the equivalent of talk radio from progressive by listening to podcasts where you get to kind of pick and choose. And all these, great organizations like NPR has podcasts, everybody who doesn't have a podcast these days, for crying out loud.
Right. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why they're on the radio and there's only 3% of progressives on the radio, which I'm going to say is just NPR, honestly. Because I can't think of, I remember I remember when Air America started with Janine Garofalo and Al Franken, and they were very involved with that. And I remember thinking, what a great idea to have a radio station. And I think it was an internet station in the very beginning or something like that. But the reason that there's so many progressive podcasts, rather, you can do it with almost no funding. Right. Whereas all of these guys who are in the right wing, they're all being sponsored by someone. Right. There's millions of dollars going into them from the Heritage Foundation, yes, from, all these different Americans for Progress and bullshit like that. That's all, they get money from that, and they're sponsored and put onto these giant, there's only so many people who own radio stations. Right. And if they're a Republican leaning radio station and they're a huge conglomerate, look at what Sinclair Media just did. Yeah. With all of our local news stations. It's really easy to see how it goes this way. So let's talk for a second about the title. She called it Brainwashing of My Dad. Right. And they talk about brainwashing by stealth. Yeah. Brainwashing by stealth it's a type of brainwashing where all the information that you're consuming coerces you into changing the emotional associations people have without noticing that it's changing them at all. So for instance, if you are watching an advertisement on TV and it provokes an emotional response, maybe it's like a Hallmark, do you remember the old Hallmark ads, and they would always make you cry around
Yes.
Christmas time. Always.
Yeah.
It would be like a son sending his mother a card, and it would fly through the air and it would land in her mailbox, and then her son would be right behind her, and he's all grown up and he loves her, and everyone would cry.
Yes.
And then you would associate that kind of emotional response with that brand, and you would be more loyal to that brand because you've had that kind of emotional response, even though in your head you're not like, oh, I love them because of that ad.
Right.
So
it's the feeling that you get.
Exactly. So if all of your information that you're bringing in from your news source, because we know that Fox News viewers do not normally watch any other news source.
Right.
They might get their news online from very similar right wing, but they're not usually watching any other news source on TV because nothing else on TV has that sort of right bent. So if that's all they're watching and all of the information they're bringing in tells them one thing, then it starts to change their emotional response. And that's what she said happened to her dad is he started listening to Rush, but then he also subscribed to the things that Rush would tell him to subscribe to in his email.
Right.
And so he would get all these daily newsletters that reiterate, you need to think this way. And they would have talking points. The Republicans have always been great about talking points. She goes into a little bit talking about Grover Norquist and how he used to have those Wednesday morning meetings. And the only three things you had to agree on was you were pro-life, pro-gun, anti-tax.
Mm.
And he got everyone in the room to agree to those things. And they were like Republican Congress people, they were lobbyists, they were CEOs of corporations, they were anyone who wanted to be there and was in a position of power, and he would get them in there once a week and they would come up with those talking points. And that's something the Republicans really stuck with.
Yeah.
We're not organized. We need to be more organized.
And they don't like big government, but they're so organized.
I know.
They say that we like government and we're like, we just don't want to organize.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are too organized.
Yeah, that's just too much for us. So basically, Fox News makes you addicted to anger. Okay.
Yeah.
And they have some tactics to get you there. And there's 9 that she listed in the documentary. And these, again, where I was sitting there just kind of horrified, but also like, oh, this is so interesting. But again, horrifying because it's almost like you want this to be a documentary about something that happened way, way in the past and is already done. And you could be horrified from a distance.
Right. So
but no.
Before you go on to the 9 steps, I just wanted to say that addiction, it comes because of the stress response that your brain gives to getting angry, which is one of the things. And I want you to go through the list, but that's why it becomes this addiction. Like that's why her dad wanted to watch it at night as well as listen to it in the car, because your brain starts to, when your brain has a stress response, it releases endorphins. And your brain will start to crave those endorphins because that's your biggest pleasure chemical in your entire brain. That's like having a climax multiple times a day. I mean, anyone would want that, but I don't want to have to watch Fox News to get it. And I don't want to have to become an asshole. I feel like there are more fun ways to have a climax than...
There are. Actually, I love looking at houses on Zillow and stuff.
Yeah.
And I sent my friend this house the other day to look at, and she was like, holy crap, we were looking at it. And I was like, yeah, I had a house orgasm looking at this.
That's right.
But seriously, I love houses.
Make it happen.
It's like I get that. I'm like, look at that backsplash. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, if stress really does it for you, go out and drive around during rush hour. I mean, that's stressful.
Please actually don't. That's what leads to road rage.
Yeah. I mean, maybe don't do that. Hang out with a 3-year-old instead. Something will give you enough stress. Find the thing, but don't make it Fox News because, dear God, no one needs that.
My father is addicted to Fox News as well. And whenever he comes to my house, it's like first thing he has to turn on Fox News. And it's like he can't breathe without Fox News being on in the background. And that's why my father's not allowed to stay in my house for more than 2 days. I'll go crazy. It might be better now because I don't have a TV upstairs anymore. So he'd have to be downstairs and I couldn't hear it. So that could be awesome.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
But then it's still on in your house.
I know. I always have to do a little clearing after. I have to turn on MSNBC for 24 hours straight just to clear the air.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah. So here's the 9 tactics that she went through that Fox News uses. So number 1, pretty easy, lie and skew.
Yeah.
Yep, they do that.
That sounds right.
They're pretty good. And she had a quote up from Joseph Goebbels from the Nazis, of the Nazi fame.
Yep.
And he said, tell a lie big enough, keep repeating it, and people will believe it.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay, yep, that's what they do. I'm not calling them Nazis. I'm just saying they like to lie.
I mean, it should maybe be noted that he was the head of Nazi propaganda.
Yeah. Yep.
And that is the exact tool that they use as well. There's a reason people call them propaganda.
Yeah. Number 2 is create confusion and doubt. And the 2 of the examples that they talked about was voter fraud and climate change, about how, they've created this narrative that there is all this voter fraud when there isn't.
Right.
We've gone over this. We did an episode about it. There's this huge narrative that climate change isn't caused by humans. It is.
It's true.
It is. We haven't done an episode about climate change, like, specifically, but, like, that's just true.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you're one of the people who doesn't believe it at this point, I mean,
you're listening to a happy podcast.
Yeah, I mean, have a happy summer, because it was just snowing in one of my friend's home states, and I don't even remember where she is, but the fact that it's snowing anywhere
Colorado,
in
maybe?
America.
Because they were talking about, I've been seeing on Facebook some friends who live in Colorado, and they're still skiing.
I don't know. I thought she was in California.
Oh boy, that's even worse. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 3 is blame and divide.
Yes.
So they do a good job at that. And then they brand and label. And so, have you ever heard the phrase liberal media?
I have. Rush's favorite phrase is feminazi, which is one of my personal favorites, because basically they just put Nazi at the end of almost anything these days. And
the one that I don't like, and please don't ever use this, just ever, is libtard. That one really pisses me off.
That one really makes me angry as well.
Okay. Number 5, language and framing. There's this guy that she interviewed. He has helped the Republican Party with language. And so, for instance, instead of saying inheritance, you say death tax.
Right. Non-inheritance tax, not we're going to tax the $2 billion that you were just left.
Right.
Because
it's a death tax.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then another example is drilling for oil versus oil exploration. Like, it's framing these things that are negative.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, in a way that makes them positive, or framing something that's not a neutral, like inheritance tax, as death tax. And he'll basically go out and he said he'll focus group, which word makes you more scared? This word or this word? And he's like, okay, 27 out of 30 people said this word, so that's the word that we're going to go with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's he's like a real person. She interviewed him.
Can we sidebar really quick and just mention the fact that inheritance tax is basically like getting a gigantic payroll that you never ever have to take any taxes out of? Like, it's a huge scam, and people put these estates together for their children, and it's just a way to get out of taxes. And now they've taken away the tax on top of the inheritance tax. So basically it's a 2 times tax loophole, and it fucking pisses me off, because it's exactly how all these fucking rich white bastards have passed down all their wealth forever. And it drives me absolutely mental, because none of them have any idea what working for a living even means. And yet they're like, welfare queens. And you're like, you are a fucking welfare queen because you literally took money out of the taxpayers' hands and put it into your own goddamn pocket.
But Kelly, that's my money, and I deserve it. And you can't, you're just trying to take money out of my pocket.
Yeah, because they fucking earned anything.
Okay, that was a good sidebar. Thank you.
Sorry for that sidebar. I'm just...
So number 6, we're only on number 6. Are you?
Okay.
Do you need some water? Are you?
I might.
Do you need some oxygen? Is anybody hyperventilating?
I feel like this one is really his home right now.
Okay. So number 6 is fear mongering and use of emotion. So I'm going to tell you something, and this may not be a surprise. The Fox News anchors are acting.
What? Are you kidding? Bill O'Reilly is always that angry.
No, they are literally acting angry and using emotion to evoke fear for that, anyway. Okay. Number 7. This is where you just want to scream at the TV. Okay. Bullying and shaming.
Yes.
So they use that against their guests that come on to try to be the other side. So it shuts the guest up and it creates fake outrage.
Yeah, and it doesn't list it on here, but part of this, I always think the bullying and shaming is when they talk over their guest, just like completely
I don't know what you're
their
talking
guest.
about, Kelly. What do you mean talking over somebody?
Yeah, it's just like that. Yeah. But, just their guest will be just saying they're part of the argument, and they will just completely talk over him. And she has an example of Megyn Kelly, which is, of course, rich anyway.
I loved the example of Megyn Kelly and her at the end going, "We are fair and balanced at Fox News, and that's what we're doing, reporting the news in a fair and balanced way." And I was like, I can't believe NBC hired her.
Yeah.
Also, one of the other clips they showed, the woman said, "I'm sorry, I think you turned my mic off."
Yes.
So they'll even turn off the mic of the guest if they're making their point.
That's right.
Yeah.
They also had Sean Hannity shouting at someone, "What part of this can't you get through your thick head?" in the middle of asking him a question.
Right.
Is just like, well, what part of this? And I just don't know. What part of this can't you? And it's, would you have any conversation with someone who talked to you like that?
Well, I got divorced, so no.
But I mean, especially someone who says that they're being fair and balanced.
Right.
Imagine being insulted during an interview. I mean, imagine just for 1 second, if we take an entertainment reporter, which is basically what they are, because they're not investigative journalists. So they're basically these entertainment reporters. Say you take the Gayle King interview with R. Kelly, and she was like, "What can't you get through your thick head? You were molesting children."
I probably would have applauded that.
I might have. I'm not gonna
lie. Yeah.
But
yeah.
Right. She didn't do that because it's not she has some journalistic integrity, unlike Sean Hannity.
Right. So the next thing that they do is basically it's just in your face, like it's everywhere. And again, they keep saying that liberals, like that all the news is liberal media and everything. And that's just simply not true at all. There's tons of conservative news outlets, and you can go look at the chart from Vanessa Otero,
right.
and you can see where the media falls with their biases. And there's plenty on the right and there's plenty on the left. Like it is not 97% on the left and only a couple of these news outlets on the right.
Correct.
That's not, it's not true at all. So,
I mean, all you have to do is just look at how many newspapers and news outlets Rupert Murdoch owns.
Right. Like the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Daily Sun. It's not just here. He owns them here. He owns them in the UK. He owns them in Australia. He owns them all over the world. You can't be like, it's all liberal bias media. Really? Does that exist in Australia as well? Or are there just liberals running around from America like, we can't wait to get our hands on your conservative viewpoints over there?
To be honest, at this point, I feel like it's more conservative news than it is liberal. And
I would agree.
Unless you count podcasts. You have to put podcasts in the mix every once in a
while. There's a shit ton of conservative podcasts, though.
There are.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they've apparently figured out how to do this, too. Okay, the last one is nonverbal manipulation. And what they're talking about here is hand gestures. Mm-hmm. Talked about they'll count to 3 on their fingers. They'll list their talking points, 1, 2, 3. And then they also use a lot of sexism because they make all the women wear short dresses in bright colors. And
it's usually tight dresses as well.
Dresses, and they're not allowed to be below the knee. Like that is a rule for Fox News women anchors. And so what they'll do is they'll overwhelm your senses with their sets are very colorful. There's a lot going on. There's all these like background lights and everything. And then they'll get you all confused, and then they'll throw their point in, and then they'll show you somebody's legs.
Right.
Like it's very, it's insane. I
have had a conversation about the way that the shows there are presented between my husband and I, and he has worked in television, and he says what it looks like is if they took, you know how they do broadcasts of the major evangelical preachers, and they do their broadcasts on Sunday mornings.
Yes.
He said it looks like if you take the lighting from that, like that soft focus lighting, the angelic lighting that they do, and they do that on their hosts, but behind them is like if you mixed in all of the NFL commentators' desks and everything.
Yes.
And then you threw some 4th of July bullshit everywhere because everything is covered in fucking flags. Everything.
Right.
From like their bottom feeder to just like graphics in the background of waving flags. They just can't wait to tell you just how American they are.
Yes. Yes.
And white. So white. So very, very white.
So white. So Kelly, you actually did some fact checking on the documentary, and I'm curious.
I did.
Like, just a quick overview. Like, how did she do? Was it pretty much on point from what she was saying?
I mean, I thought it was. I know that documentaries can be made by anyone, and they're not always fact checked.
What?
Yeah, it's true. Did you know Dinesh D'Souza, or whatever that guy is, D'Souza? He has made documentaries, and Steve Bannon has made documentaries.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So people make documentaries all the time, and it doesn't mean that they're true, although there was a lot of home footage that gave evidence.
Yes.
And she had a lot of people that she interviewed via Skype that gave evidence of their own stories. But I wanted to just make sure that some of the background stuff that she was talking about, like stuff about the John Birch Society and things like that no-go zones, because I remember hearing that and thinking that that was true.
Right, right.
And so when I saw it on the documentary, I was like, oh, shit, that wasn't true.
Yeah.
And that was a real eye-opener for me because it really brought home that point of it's this insidious, creeping nature of a false narrative that Fox has put forward as the truth. They're fair and balanced truth, but realistically, they can create these false stories until someone finally makes them stop.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, the thing that made them stop that story was the mayor of Paris sued them.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
The almighty dollar.
Yeah. And so I also checked on some of the people that she had in her podcast to make sure that they were like legit people, because again, you can get people on your podcast sometimes who are not people on your podcast, but people on your documentary.
Yes.
You can get people to say anything on your side. You can always find people who are on the same side as you usually.
True.
I just wanted to make sure that those people were legit, and they all were. Thank goodness.
So,
yeah.
So just a quick wrap up. I just want to mention this documentary did come out in 2015. The director's name is Jensen Ko, and this is about basically her story as well as with a lot of facts in it. And we had talked in the beginning about the ending with her mom. So I just want to mention it really quickly. What happened is, and this, I thought it was so great. Like her dad's radio broke, first of all. So he stopped listening to it in the kitchen, and him and his wife started having lunch together again and started talking. And then they got a new TV, and she programmed the remotes, and he didn't know how to use them. And so he just watched whatever she watched. So she didn't put on Fox News anymore. And then the final nail in the coffin of the conservative news barrage that he was getting was he went to the hospital, and the mom asked the daughter to help her clean up the dad's email. And they realized that he was subscribed to all of these super conservative newsletters that were just barraging his email box with these emails every day. And so the mom went in and unsubscribed him and then subscribed him to liberal newsletters instead.
Or just truthful ones.
Yeah.
I think it was just truthful ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he came back home and started reading the new newsletters and started coming back to be the person that, the director remembered. Like, his views changed back to being somewhere in the middle, basically. But his personality changed back too, to where he was being nicer again and he wasn't so angry all the time because he wasn't getting that. And he did stop listening to Rush Limbaugh. Like, he recognized and said, like, yeah, I'm not going to listen to him anymore.
Yeah, he said, I don't even know what happened.
Yeah.
I just didn't agree with some of the stuff he was saying anymore, and I stopped listening to him.
Yeah.
So he didn't even recognize that he was being manipulated in that way. And,
Right.
I've seen that in my own family. It sounds like you've seen it in your own family. I've seen a family member intentionally do that to another family member, and I still will never forgive them for that. So it's terrible, especially when the person is older.
Oh, wow. So, a very good documentary. Definitely would recommend watching it. And there is quite a few more out there as well, kind of on this topic. But this one was easy to, it was an easy watch. Like, it wasn't so like, remember that Data one that we watched that was like, oh my God, how much longer is it going to go on?
Yeah. Yeah. But that was also super scary.
Yeah.
That was the one about the people selling our data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, we broke that story before anyone else did.
Oh, yeah.
Not really. I mean, there was already a freaking documentary
we broke
on
it by watching a documentary on it.
Yeah.
No, but this is like, actually, like, it's scary, but also fun to watch, if that makes any sense. Kind of like Pain and Gain. That.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why I'm pushing that today. It's not like I'm like a big fan of that movie and I'm like, everybody needs to go watch this. But
Beth's over here getting residuals from that.
It's not even my jam of the week.
No, it's not.
All right. So I do want to mention really quick, there was a organization mentioned at the end of the documentary called Hear Yourself Think. And we are actually communicating with them right now to do a upcoming interview with them. So hopefully we'll have that for you next.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yes. So if it's not next, hopefully it'll be really soon, because definitely sounds like a really cool organization and I can't wait to find out more about it. So
yeah, and it's a husband and wife team, which is really cool as well.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to our jam of the weeks and let everybody get going so that they can go watch this documentary.
I think I go first this week, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
So my jam of the week, I chose a book called Dark Money: The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right. And this is by Jane Mayer.
I was going to say, is this by Jane Mayer?
Yeah, it is. And I actually first heard of this book listening to Pod Save America.
Right.
And read it. And I feel like this book fits like a puzzle piece next to this story, which is why I chose it, because it also goes into the beginning of the John Birch Society and the Koch brothers and how they have, it's basically like, how they talk in this documentary, you'll hear them talk a little bit about the think tanks that drive the engine behind the right-wing news media organizations, whether it's Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, whatever. When we're talking about Grover Norquist's Wednesday meetings, when we're talking about American Center for Progress, whether we're talking about the Heritage Foundation, all of that is talked about in her movie or in her book, Dark Money, because it just really talks about how these billionaires came to rule America. And a lot of it is just so based on dissuading the American public from thinking that their votes are important, that politics is important, that being interested in politics is important, that politicians can even do anything. Like the idea that, all politicians are the same, they're all just garbage. Like they've been propagating that myth for decades now. And so we've all just kind of bought into it.
I just have to break in and say, when you vote, that is the one time that you are on par with anybody else.
Right.
Billionaires only have one vote. Your boss only has one vote. Anybody, the president of the United States only has one vote in an election. So that is the one time that you are literally on par with anybody else and have the same amount of power as anybody else. And when you choose to not vote, you're giving that power away. And I'm very pro voting. very, very pro voting. I was really disappointed. We just had an election here, and I was disappointed to see that going into the election, because Oregon is a mail-in ballot state, so we know like some numbers beforehand. Like
Right.
Only 11% of people voted in this election, and going into the day. So maybe it got up to 20%. I haven't seen any final numbers, but that's pretty standard for a May election on a non-presidential year. And that's sad.
Yeah.
That literally 80% of people will stay home and let 20% of people decide for them some of these really important down ballot races that are just super important. That I know in my area, we're voting on a couple of different people for the school board. And 20% of us got to pick who's going to be on the school board. So yeah.
Yeah, same here.
Throw that in there. All right. So are you ready for mine? Or do you have anything else in yours? Okay. So my gem of the week. Now, I could have gone with a really simple one. I could have gone with the song, What Does the Fox Say? But I have to be honest, I fucking hate that song.
Aw.
So I couldn't do it. It's on like my kids, like one of their dance.
Oh, I'd never let my son listen to that song. Never. I get it though. I get if your kid like accidentally discovers it, but I will actively avoid that song for my kid. I just think it's funny for me.
Yeah, it's on, what is that? What am I thinking of? It's like the video game that you dance to. And it's like,
oh, is it Dance Dance Revolution?
Something like that. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So it's on one of those, and they like, with the Wii, and they're like, what does the fox say? And I'm like, oh my God, please not again. Anyway, so I could have picked that, but instead I went with a song by Fitz and the Tantrums, which I thought was nice because there's a lot of tantrums on Fox News.
There are.
The song is called Hand Clap. And I also had to kind of chuckle because, it's like, I can make your hands clap. And I feel like that's very relevant with Fox News viewers. Yeah. Like all you have to do is say like Muslims or ISIS or death, and they'll clap their hands.
Yeah. Lock her up. Benghazi. I mean, they'll just take anything you throw at them.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also a very fun and catchy and good song as well, which is also on my kids' dance thing. Why can't I think of the name of it? It's good. I mean, I'm going to have to go look at it. Just Dance. That's what it's called. Just Dance is the name of the game. And anyway, both those, I just remembered Hand Clap is on there as well. But that one doesn't annoy me.
It must not come on as much. But I could see how What Does the Fox Say becoming annoying very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. All right. So that is our show for today. If you like this show, head on over to where we get your podcasts and rate and review and subscribe. That way more people can find us and you won't miss any episodes. We will be back in 2 weeks, hopefully with our interview with Hear Yourself Think. And if not, something else.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We don't know.
We don't. Listen, we've already established that Democrats are not planners.
It's true. We're not.
We are not that organized.
We'll do all the research. We just won't do it until 3 days before.
Right. And, that's okay.
Yeah.
So, you can find us on podcast. You can find us on a podcast.
You can find us on a podcast. You can find us at podcastfakenews.com. You can find us at Podcast Fake News on Facebook and on Twitter.
That's right.
And you can find us on iTunes.
You can.
Yes, podcastfakenews@gmail if you want to send us some mail.
That's right.
We will take your mail. We will read it. We might not respond to it.
We might. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a surprise. Flip of a coin. Who knows? We might. But we will be bringing you another episode in 2 weeks on Stitcher, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, Spotify. We're on all the things. Even YouTube.
All right. So until next time, don't forget, spread jam.
Not lies.